Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates. The Prince Off the Cuff, presented by IIFL Wealth and Asset Management, corporate partner AU Small Finance Bank, in association with Jindal Steel and Power, airline partner SpiceJet.
So many times in the past, I have said that Delhi and Mumbai are two sovereign republics which are yet to establish diplomatic relations. So in the old days, I used to say that still the only place where the two sovereign nations talk is the Jet Airways business class. Now Jet Airways is gone. So all we are left with now, in any case, most of the flying is gone. What we are left with right now is Skype and stuff like that. So to resume this conversation, we now have Deepak Parekh as much a representative plenipotentiary of the sovereign of Mumbai as anybody else. Deepak, welcome to Off the Cuff.
Thank you.
Taken us some doing to get you here, although I have no hesitation in saying that in the past 20 years, I have not taken any major decision personally or professionally without consulting you. I thought you were about to say, why blame me?
No, I was going to say I'm honored.
Deepak, the other thing that I say about you is that in all my life of meeting diverse people, I've never seen anybody whose eyes light up like yours listening to someone else's problem. And that is not in delight, that's not schadenfreude, but because you want to resolve everybody's problems. So you as a champion problem solver, resolve India's problem right now, Indian economy's problem, and corporate India's problem right now. Because the situation we are facing is very dire.
Shekhar, it's a pleasure to be on a video with you after doing many walk the talks in the past. See, in the midst of every crisis lies a great opportunity. Who said this? It was Albert Einstein who said that some 80, 90, 100 years ago. So, opportunity in adversity. For instance, tough times don't last forever, but tough countries do. Nothing lasts forever. Even your troubles go away. So, I'm quite hopeful that after we win this pandemic over, or reduce the burden of it, and I see that happening. If you look at the number of cases in India, see there are 18 million cases globally and 1.8 million in India. So we have 10% of the cases in India. However, the death rate in India, fatality rate is still below 2%, around 2%, while globally it is closer to 4%. So I think we've managed it very well by shutting down and having a total lockdown. And I think that just to say that month of April and May have been disaster across the board. But I see a lot of hope in July. June we saw a ray of hope, but July I'm convinced, seeing lots of numbers, seeing our own growth numbers, that the hump is gone, we are past the hump, and we are in for better times. You have seen in your own, in all the media, that the e-way bills, the collection of e-way, the toll collection, the GST, like take for instance, although some newspapers have criticized, the July month we got 87,000 crores as GST receipts. And in June we got 90,000 crores. June number had some carry forward of May. So we are improving. We are improving every month, and this is almost 85-90% of normal levels. So I see a lot of hope that there's massive pent up demand. If you even see the GDP growth rate, what is projected by IMF, let me tell you what IMF has said. This year, the world will degrow, the global economy will degrow by 4.9%. India will degrow by 4.5%. 2021, the IMF predicts the global growth will be 5.4%, but India will be 6%. Now, if India is 6% plus, and in 2020 it was minus 4.5%, look at the swing. Look at what we are, there's a massive pent up demand in retail, in consumers. You see, Maruti has sold over 1 lakh cars in the month of July. Tractor sales are back to 90%. So there are certain sectors which are severely damaged and they'll take time to recover. And, these are hospitality, travel, tourism. This is going to take time to recover. But I see, let me tell you one large infrastructure multinational company, very well-known company. It has 21 factories in India. April, May, all were shut. Now all are open in July. All are open with 10 to 70% productivity or manpower coming back gradually. And we expect that August, September will come back to normal times. The same company has 300 sites where they do installation and servicing, 300 sites in India. And 70% are fully operational. So you take any number, you take any criteria, I think India is slowly limping back to pre-COVID days. But don't forget, even pre-COVID days, there was a slowdown. So, but we are getting back to the pre-COVID. I can give you a number of statistics and say to firm up my view that the worst is behind us and August will be even better than July.
Now, pent-up demand is logical, but you can only fulfill that demand if you have the income. Given the amount of job losses, income losses, salary cuts, not just in the media, but across the board, and risk aversion, people want to hang on to the money that they have. Do you see that this pent-up, usual principles of pent-up demand, then driving growth or bringing back growth, materializing? People are suffering badly.
No, people are suffering, but say, take for instance, 65-66% of our population lives in rural area and 34% in urban area. Now, if you look at the rural population, the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme of the Government of India has been a tremendous benefit for the poor people, for the rural economy. Also, the Prime Minister's announcement that we will give a free ration of 2 kilos of rice or wheat and pulses, wheat and pulses till November 2020. So, the government is doing it bits in the rural areas. They're deshackling the agriculture industry. They're allowing farmers to sell directly in the market. They're cutting middlemen. So farmers will get a better realizable value. So, everything possible. Monsoon gods have been good. The estimate is that we'll have 103% normal monsoon. Take instance the food grains. The biggest positive factor I see is that our warehouses are full of food grain stockpiles. We have over 100 million stockpiles of food grains.
Well, all that's positive, but you see, all that doesn't add up to surpluses. Because if you have surplus income, you can buy, because you have to make discretionary purchases for the economy to come back. So what needs to be done to fuel that?
See, basically, if you look at any penetration level or any take mortgage, for instance. See, first of all, let me tell you, in the last 4 months, sitting at home every day, I'm talking to a number of people on the telephone, video, Zoom and all that. Most people are saying 2-3 things. We are scared to go by public transport when it opens up. We have to buy a two-wheeler or a small, cheap car. Otherwise, we will be afraid to go in public transport. Public transport, train services, metros may not even start for 3-4 months. So that investment, and these are willing to give 90% on these purchases. Consumer credit in India is 13% of GDP. 13%. It is 80% in US. And even in China, it is 30-40%, 40% in China. So consumer credit is going to boom. The lending agencies will see more loans for white goods, for autos, two-wheelers, and homes. The other thing I hear from people is that we are all cooped up in one room. We are 8 of us in one room. We have to now take 80-90% loan from mortgage companies and banks to buy a small house, because we cannot survive like this in one room or 2 rooms with so many of us. So, there will be a consumer revival will be there, but credit will take off. Insurance, even Indonesia and Thailand has more penetration of insurance than India, believe it or not. Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia is more than India. Now people are saying we want life insurance policy because it's a protection. We want to insure accident because accident health will boom. So, these are the things, despite people losing jobs. I agree some people have lost jobs, and the salary losses, Shekhar, I've seen number of companies cut salaries, but they are in the top 10, 20, 30%. No one is touching the last 70%, 60%. It's all on higher salaries that we have cut. We have done the same thing. We've cut bonuses at the higher level. A number of our...
That the conservative Mr. Parekh will be very happy about, top level salaries being cut.
We'll be delighted.
Will be delighted. But I hope nobody follows that advice from you, because essentially I still have an employee's mindset. I may not be an employee now, but I have an employee's mindset. So Deepak, what can be done now by the corporate sector, by your universe immediately, which is banking and finance, and by the government, to put more money in people's hands?
See, after the crisis we had of ILFS and Diwan housing and all, there is total risk aversion in the financial sector. Everyone is talking about risk aversion. So much so that Reserve Bank, what have central banks done globally? Central banks have done 3 things to ease the pain. Monetary policy have done 3 things. Lower interest rates. Our interest rates today are the lowest in 10 years. On Thursday, we have a Reserve Bank Monetary Policy Committee. There's a 50-50 view. 50% view is that they'll bring it down further, 25 basis points. 50% economists feel that they will keep status quo because they are worried about inflation. So if you see, one is reducing interest rate. Second one, asset purchases. And third is injecting liquidity. Look at the amount of liquidity Reserve Bank has put in the market. They've given money to banks to give to SIDBI, NABARD, housing finance company. They've given money to the banks to buy bonds from the mutual funds because there was a crisis in the debt market. They've given money to banks to lend to BBB and AA and single A companies. So we are flushed with liquidity. RBI has flushed the market with liquidity. So, but aversion of banks must be there. And the problem here is that the NPAs are already high. Now, let me give you one example of MSME. Government has done remarkably by saying we'll give you 3 lakh crores to MSME and guarantee, give 20% additional working capital. And out of the 3 lakh crore, I think 1 lakh crore is committed, 81,000 is dispersed. So it's moving. But if you talk to the bankers, they say on an existing MSME portfolio, the NPAs are 12.5%. If the existing NPAs of MSME are 12.5%, pushing more money to the same people or the same lot, because MSMEs are squeezed from the big boys. The public sector, the private sector, they don't pay them on time. MSMEs ask is, instead of giving us more money, let our people whom we provided services and goods pay us back. But that payment culture in India is non-existent, Shekhar. You buy a thing on credit, you pay when you like to pay. We have to improve the discipline there.
That's true of government and private sector, or more government and private sector?
That's true. And state governments.
State governments. So governments have to start paying up their own debts.
Own debt.
So instead of pushing more debt in the hands of MSMEs, give them revenues that they have earned already.
we need a factoring service where the MSME can go to someone to say these are the recoveries from these states or PSUs of the state public sector companies. Please take it and give us money.
And how would those, I mean, that's fascinating. Remember, now don't presume that I know all this because you are Bombay, I am Delhi. You are Mumbai, I am in Delhi. So please explain to the dumb Delhiwala, how does this factoring service work?
No, factoring service is you realize your debtors immediately. You sell a good on credit for 90 days. You go to a factoring company or go to a bank and discount these receivables. It is just discounting these receivables and paying a price for it. They'll charge you 90 days interest because you have given a 90-day credit.
It's like a letter of credit.
Yeah.
It's like so has that been done ever in India before?
I think people have tried. It has not worked for some reason. We have to look at it again. We have tried. But so it's this is one of the issues. The only difference between our central bank and the other global central banks is that we have lowered interest rates and we are lowering interest rates. We have infused enormous liquidity in the system. Asset purchases by global central banks. Our central bank is not doing that, and our central bank is giving money to banks to do that asset purchases. Like the US Federal Reserve has bought municipal bonds, junk bonds, commercial paper. The same thing ECB has done. The same thing Bank of Japan has done. But our Reserve Bank, I think the law doesn't permit Reserve Bank to buy private sector paper. So the RBI is using the medium of the banks. Now the banks have to be more aggressive. But the bank's issue is that we already have a weak balance sheet. We have to raise equity. Our NPAs are already high. Gross NPAs are high. We have to collect more money. Various sectors like hospitality and all in trouble. Airports, hospitality. How are we going to get our funds back? So, so the request with the industry is ask the central bank, and we keep hearing that government and Reserve Bank are talking about. In 2008, 2009, they allowed restructuring of loans. Give 1 year restructuring for this pandemic. So it means moratorium. We also want to help individual small buyers of property and all, give them time to pay, give them time to recover their income, give them time to find a job, give them time to maybe divest their savings or whatever. So if you give a restructuring window of 1 year, that means you're not collecting money from anyone who doesn't want to pay. If they want to pay, they're most welcome. But if they don't want to pay, you give them, but it doesn't become an NPA. By giving moratorium, we are creating a problem later on.
Okay.
Next year.
So again, for clarity, you are saying not a moratorium, but restructuring.
Yeah.
So once again, please explain it like Mumbai explaining to Delhi, because Mumbai is, this is how to do it. Delhi is, we will tell you how not to do it. So you be
for instance, take the problem started in March. So take February. Most people will pay you on the 89th day because they know that after 90 it becomes an NPA. Number of individuals are paying us on, number means 10%, 15%, not the 100% book. So because they are tight of resources, they have liquidity issues. So basically what it means is that whatever is due on March 1, 2020, take it in March 21. So 1 year, you give them a breather. There's a holiday to repay if they want to take that holiday, and extend the tenure of the loan.
Right. But so they continue paying interest for this period, but extend.
No, they don't have to. Even the interest can be back-ended. We can calculate the interest if they have lost their jobs or something. We want to help the common man. We don't want to throw out a man from his house or repossess a car or something. We want to help.
So how will you compensate yourself for the interest loss?
See, it is an interest postponement.
Postponement, okay.
It's an interest postponement. It's not a deferment, permanent deferment.
I get it. Now I get it. So, Deepak, to take you back to what you had said just a couple of minutes back, you said 50% think there will be a rate cut, 50% think there will not be a rate cut. So, which 50% are you with?
Rate cut.
Rate cut. And only
You know, it is the prerogative of the MPC. We can't really say. It's not my job to predict. It's their call. It's their responsibility. It's their wise decision. And it's not one man now. As you know, it's a combination of
right.
of intellectuals sitting and discussing, economists.
Well, and only 25 basis points. Again, this is a wish. You are expressing a wish. You are not giving anybody advice. So only 25 basis points, or you think that's too homeopathic?
No, I think we have to even be concerned about inflation. We have to be concerned, steady. We don't believe in big bangs. We do everything modestly. So, you'll never see 100 basis point cut or increase in interest rates. It's always drop by drop.
It happened in 2008, one Monday morning when it looked like the world will come to an end. I think in October, late October or early November, that those kinds of cuts were carried out. You think there is time to do something drastic like that?
I don't think so. I think financial stability is very important. And there is limited financial space with the government also. So we have to be careful. See, you must have seen the tax revenue collections for the first quarter. They've come down by 33%.
Right.
April, May, June by 33%. But very cleverly, the government has increased the excise duties on petrol, diesel and ATF, airline turbine fuel. Right. And so they have collected fair amount of money without upsetting too much the price, because the price of oil has come down significantly, crude. That is our biggest advantage. People are saying about downgrade. I said there's no justification for any international rating agencies, because our long-term strategy, our long-term growth prospects are so, and the biggest problem we have is foreign exchange. We have over $500 billion in foreign exchange. We've never had it so good. $523 billion. It is 13-14 months imports. We had 15 days imports. Now we have 14 months imports.
So what do we do with those reserves? Do we just let them sit there like a headline figure and keep celebrating?
Well, reserves. We are the fifth largest. We have the fifth largest reserves in the world now. Switzerland, Russia, Japan, and China are ahead of us. But reserves are good for a rainy day. It helps us on a rainy day. And if we have to import more, suppose the oil goes back to $130 per barrel, then we will need all of those reserves. So you can't squander it away. There are various suggestions that reserves can be used for domestic growth and all that, to spend on infrastructure. Because one move the government will have to do, and everyone recognizes it, that there is massive unmet demand in infrastructure. We have to spend much more on infrastructure, because then jobs will be created, steel and cement will be used, which are surplus capacities. You want to exhaust the existing capacities that these factories have, these companies have. So spending on infrastructure is very essential now, absolutely essential.
So if this isn't that rainy day, what other rainy day are we going to have? This is as much of a rainy, it's a cloud burst.
I know but there's a shocking report of MIT recently in June this year. MIT says that if by the spring of 2021, if a cure is not found for the pandemic, then the infections will go up 12 times what we have today, and the fatalities will increase by 50%. This is a 1-month-old report of MIT. I'm confident that so many pharma and research companies and countries are working on discovery of a virus. And I'm sure in the next 6-8 months, we will find a vaccine, which will take care of this.
Well, the fact is that since that first Imperial College research to now, these modelers have met their Waterloo with this virus. So let's err on the side of optimism. That's what I would do.
I agree.
But if you had access to these reserves today in India, how would you use them? Instead of thinking that, things will get worse and worse and worse, and then I decide, it's like you know the markets. It's like, when do you invest in the market? How do you call the bottom in the market? So how do you call bottom in an economic crisis? You have to start using that money.
I know, but it is security of a country, it is safety of a country. You know, various countries like Singapore and Abu Dhabi and all have used their reserves by forming investment companies, and they invest globally or they invest in India. So what I meant by asset purchase is what central banks are doing. Central banks are even in the past doing equity asset purchases. There's no harm of government by buying some good equities also.
Right.
So, you know, we have to think through how to use this foreign exchange reserves, but we can't squander it away, and we can't utilize it in a flippant manner, because we've had, you know, we've started with 100, 200 billion. We've now come to 500 billion. It's a great achievement. It's really because it's through FDI and FPIs, foreign portfolio. Now, don't forget, foreign portfolio investors are very, very uncertain, slippery. Little negative news, they'll take money out. As we saw in March, April, the foreign portfolio invested took out massive sums of money from India. Massive. June, July, May, June, they sort of net inflows were positive. July, again, the inflows are negative. So if they decide to abandon India, go out of India, and feel that the prospects are not good for 1 year, you can lose large sums of these reserves overnight. These are not FDI. So these are not put in plant and machinery. They are in equity.
These are portfolio investments.
Portfolio, debt and equity.
So Deepak, two things. One, the grievance that individuals always have and the borrowers have, that there is a big gap between what the rate that RBI sets and the rate at which they borrow. Even the loans that government is now underwriting, these 3 lakh crore loans, the 9.25%, 9.5%, this is too high. So that is one. And the second, how do you get rid of risk aversion among lenders?
See, on the first point, if you don't have strong institutions and strong banks, you can forget about anything. You need to have stronger institutions. You must have high net worth, good high net worth for investors to come in, for depositors to have faith in the bank to put money. So basically, banks have to be viable. NBFCs have to be viable to survive. They have to make a profit. They have to make profit. They can't be in loss making. So, you know, that accusation that banks and others are hiding more or keeping more of the interest is not correct. I don't agree with that. As much as possible, there is so much competition in every sector. In car loan, if State Bank brings it down, our bank has to bring it down. If someone brings down the mortgage rate, we will have to bring it down. So basically,
I think you become lower and your chin is getting hidden. So what do we do?
This is fine, or you can tilt down.
Better?
Or you can tilt your screen just a little bit, because you will lean forward when you talk.
I won't lean then.
Oh, no, be yourself. Be yourself. Okay. 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 Yes. So you are saying that lenders have to also make money.
Make money. The second point of risk aversion. See, the issue really is that we are all have NPAs. What do we do with NPAs? Take, for instance, the public sector banks. If they show more losses, then the capital ratios will go out of whack. Our government will have to put more capital into the banks. And so it's a chicken and egg kind of situation. The more risk you take, the more likelihood of your NPA is increasing. Who's going to bail you out? The shareholders have to bail you out. And, you know, private sector has to be very careful, because if we start making losses or if we have large NPAs, they'll dump all of us. We won't be able to borrow money. Well, there is some talk in the market that, again, from your part of the world, that India desperately needs a DFI, a development financial institution because no one is funding projects, or very few banks are funding projects, long-term projects. And you need a DFI kind of thing, an infrastructure company or something who would lend money, because more and more infrastructure is being privatized, be it airport or be it roads or ports or power and renewables. So they all need long-term 15-year money, because it takes 5 years for a power project to go on stream. No, so your issue was on risk
Aversion.
confident to lend. But it's such a vicious circle. We already have an NPA. The financial system is already weak with large NPAs and potentially increasing NPAs after this pandemic. And in that scenario, whatever liquidity the RBI is giving to the banks are putting it again with the Reserve Bank in reverse repo.
Right.
So Reserve Bank is bringing down the reverse repo rates every time they have a policy. Now it's 3.75%. I won't be surprised if on Thursday they bring it down by another 100 basis points. So to make it a disincentive for banks to put money with Reserve Bank, then you have to lend.
So if banks have to lend today, where should they be lending? Individuals, retail, or projects?
No, combination of all. Combination of all. It has to be projects also. But banks are saying we don't have long-term funds. These are current accounts and savings account and term deposits. We don't have 20-year money. We don't have 15-year money. So how do we lend 15 years for a project? So that is which is what IDBI and ICICI and all used to do when they were development financial institutions. They used to give 15-year loans.
So are you happy with the idea of a new DFI coming up?
I think we may have to think about it. It depends who puts the capital, who's running it, and you must be willing to take risks.
Because if the government sets it up, then you will have the same problem that you had in the past.
Yeah, but even private sector's experience has not been that good.
Some private sectors. Some private sectors. So I have a question from YP Rajesh, who's our managing editor. And he says that since you mentioned private sector, that you've had PMC, we've had Yes Bank, we've had PNB, Nirav Modi. Does it show that India needs to rethink its regulatory mechanism?
I think we have to rethink our legal mechanism. It takes far too long for the culprits to be booked, and we have to one of the pending things I think with the government is, and they have been talking about it, that we need reforms in land, labor, and law. And so once
We lost you for a second, it seems.
Solvency cases. So we need to build infrastructure in NCLT.
Can you repeat that? Because we had an outage for a second, it seems. So you said 3 reforms: land, labor,
law. Land, labor, and law.
Yes.
And labor and law. We need these reforms in order to attract even foreign companies to come into India with manufacturing. You must have a little flexi labor policy, and land must be easily available to set up factories. And you see, the efficacy and the efficiency of the legal system is non-existent almost. Because by the time Harshad Mehta was tried, he died. He had died already. That type of thing, the scandal of Harshad Mehta or Ketan Parekh, all these people. So it takes far too long for our legal systems to work. Even the insolvency is IBC was a great initiative of the government. But the time it takes, because of lack of infrastructure, lack of qualified people, lack of resolution professionals willing to take up that job. So it is very complex.
But can be simplified.
We have to simplify it, and I think like for instance, we have a system that if you write a check and a check bounces, it's a criminal liability. But nothing happens.
Nothing happens.
42 years we've had number of checks being bounced. You can keep filing in court that this is a criminal offense, do something, but nothing happens to those people who write bogus checks or checks with no. So, we have to, efficiency of the legal system must be there.
So you think this law has to be enforced better, or do you think bounce checks should be decriminalized?
No, it could be decriminalized. It could be decriminalized. I know it's very severe if one check by mistake even bounces. So it is a little harsh. But if you can say if 3 checks bounce or if 5 checks bounce or something like that, then it could become a criminal offense or something. And we have credit bureaus now who keep a tab on it.
Right. So, Deepak, this is legal reform, I understand. Now, specific issues. Do you think Yes Bank issue is now stable and sorted out? Or do you still see it as a systemic threat?
No, I think it's much under control. The new management, the new CEO has, in the last 2-3 quarters, they have created a large amount of reserves for non-performing loans. And so, a lot of that is being taken care of. And we saw a glimmer of hope. The deposits also increased in this quarter a little bit. The crux is whether deposit increases. And now with State Bank CFO running it and State Bank behind it, I think that confidence has come back again in the market. Still take some time.
HDFC also put in some money.
Yeah, we all put in. You see, the reason people are asking me, why did we put in money? We feel that as part of a large player of the financial sector, if a large bank like Yes Bank goes under, it will impact the financial stability and everyone will get impacted. So it is better to have a corporate view and cooperate with other banks like Axis and ICICI, and we all helped the private sector banks. So we all, public, private, we all got together and we gave the first round of capital, and then they raised the second round in the market. And hopefully they've raised enough now to last them for a couple of years and to start lending and cleaning up their books.
So are you optimistic about the bank, or have you mentally written off this money that...
No, you can't write 1,000 crore. I'm optimistic. If we are not optimistic, we wouldn't just dish out. It's not my money. It's the shareholders' money.
That's true. I have a question now from somebody who works not far away from you, somebody at DSP Mutual Fund, and these are our guests, Vivek Ramakrishnan, who says, is it better for India to spend its way out of trouble rather than fear a downgrade and take economic losses? Which means, again, there's a question from a colleague of mine, should India start printing money and spend its way out of trouble?
I don't think so. I don't think we should blindly print money as some of the other central banks have done. You'll be shocked at seeing the numbers. The Federal Reserve has pumped in, their balance sheet in 6 months have gone up by $6 trillion. $6 trillion. The European Central Bank's balance sheet has gone up by $4 trillion in 4 months. And Bank of England and Bank of Japan by $1 trillion each. Now, what have they done with this? They are just trying to buy their way into it. They are buying private sector bonds and municipal bonds, and they are lending. They are lending freely. They are supporting industries. In UK, they are paying wages, 70% of wages of the hospitality sector, and all the government is paying, even if it's a private sector. So, there is a lot of, there's no difference between private public sector. They basically want to save their economies. And therefore, they are doing that, but they can do that. I think in our case, the fiscal space is limited. We can do it to some extent, but we can't do it to the size that these other central banks have done. But ultimately, government will have to raise resources and government will have to sell. Even today, they have 80% in Punjab National Bank, in Canara Bank, 79%. They don't need to have 80 and 79%. They have to divest. Divestment should be top priority for government to raise resources. And I was delighted to read that they are wanting to privatize, list LIC, not privatize, list LIC. LIC, Shekhar, is the largest financial institution in India. a 10% stake sale would get them around 1 lakh crore.
Even today, even in this market.
Even in this market, because it's a large institution. So, you know, they have to take advantage of these kind of assets, monetize assets. You have to monetize your assets.
And nationalized banks, you are saying government should reduce equity or government should privatize, give up?
No, at least reduce it to 51%, 30%, gradually come down.
Right.
Have to come down, raise resources, let them have better managerial talent, let them be more independent.
So Ila Patnaik, who writes on economics for us, and she's a professor, as you know, she asks, can the Indian model of a public sector dominated banking system serve the needs of a rapidly growing and globalizing economy?
Well, we are used to public sector banking. Today, public sector banking is predominantly lending. Private sector may have a smaller sliver of operations. Unlike mutual funds, where unit trust and LIC mutual fund and have been left behind, and the mutual fund industry has gone up. Similarly, in insurance, in a short period of time, almost 50% of insurance is done by private sector. It's not so in the banking sector.
Why?
It is not so because there are very few banks. There are 2-3 banks. And the ones that have started lately, the ones they got into trouble, people have lost confidence when this large number of bad debts are shown or banks make losses. Confidence of people is lost. They always go for quality. So when something like Yes Bank happens, the beneficiary is State Bank. We are the second beneficiary because in these difficult days, our deposit rates our deposits have gone up significantly because people want to be safe. You know, you hear of other banks, I don't want to name individual banks, but you hear of other banks that they are weak banks or they are in difficulty because large NPAs will come out. So basically the faith of the common man is with the public sector. This is Government of India. Even if it is a bank which is rated C or D, they will never default. So that confidence a common man has in a public sector bank. So I think doing away 100% with the public sector bank model, I don't think is possible in India because we are used to this safety angle.
Yes, but to have the system dominated by that, would you rather not that this balance was, that there was a better balance than this, like insurance, like 50-50?
It is happening. It is happening. We need more banks. We need more smaller banks to become larger. Consolidation will happen in industry. So we need that.
Now, before I go to other questions, a question of mine. Are you happy with the value of the rupee? Because lots of people think that let the rupee weaken and find its real level, and that will solve some problems like trade imbalance with China as well.
I feel that the exchange rate, which is a free exchange rate, because of India's stability, because of India's long-term growth prospects, because of the large reserves, because of the conservative nature of our central bank, I think our depreciation in our currency has been minimal. If you look at Brazil, and it's 32%, the currency has depreciated 32%. If you look at Russia, it's depreciated 14%. Turkey has depreciated 20% since January this year, in 7 months, while we have 5%, around 5%. So I don't think that you should do a massive devaluation or let the rupee come down significantly. And I think
a little bit, 80, 85, like that.
No need. Why? I don't see the need. It's a free market. See, today we are getting money in. Our FDIs have, take the strengths. Our outflows have come down. Outflows on oil has come down. At $40 a barrel, we saved $46 billion in 1 year. Don't forget, in April, it was $20. In May, it became $30. Now it's around $40, $45. The amount of saving in foreign exchange we have, it's a huge benefit. Our second largest imports are electronics. Now, with 5 months, 4 months gone in this pandemic, people are not importing large amount of electronics to, so even the import of that has come down. On the other hand, inflows have increased. We are the largest recipients of NRI deposits coming back. In 1990, we got $80 billion from NRIs repatriating. This year, it may be a little less. My worry is something else. My worry is that GCC countries are having their own pain. And large number of our population is in those countries. And they remit a lot of money because their families are here. Now, many countries are thinking of having quotas. Kuwait has already started. There's a draft quota bill where they say no country can have more than 15% population of the country. So if Kuwait's population, I think, is about 4.5 million people, so not more than 15% Indians can work there. Today, the number is much higher. And people will lose jobs in the other parts of the Gulf countries. Oil prices have come down, oil revenues have come down, and so they'll have to come back. And we have to find something for them. They'll come back with their money. So our reserves are going to, that inflow is also going to increase, because if they lose their job, they're not going to keep the money in any of these countries. So, we have our foreign exchange position is reasonably strong. So there's no need to depreciate the currency. Yes, if all the FPI money goes out, then we'll have automatically it'll come down. It is not a monitored rate. It's a free rate.
So, Yashodhan Nerurkar from PPFAS Mutual Fund. Do you think there will be consolidation in the NBFC space in the next 2 years or so? You have the Dada NBFC under your chair.
I think there will be consolidation in life insurance, in general insurance, in asset management, in NBFCs, in banks. There will be consolidation. We need larger institutions, not smaller. So there has to be consolidation. In the entire financial sector, there will be consolidation.
On NBFCs, will you talk a little bit more about the kind of problems they've run into and why and what's the way out?
See, the biggest problem they ran into when money was easily available and a plenty. Even today, the money is plenty, but not easily available. That's the difference. Many of them borrowed 3 months, 6 months commercial paper because that was the most economical cost to them. And they lent money at higher rates. Now, with a total asset liability mismatch, Reserve Bank also got a bit strict on ALM. Mutual funds, who were the largest companies giving money as commercial paper for 3 months and 6 months to NBFCs, realized that it's more dangerous to give money to smaller NBFCs. So they sort of withdrew. Their debt funds had redemptions. The fresh money mutual funds are getting are lower. So that amount came down. Investable amounts came down. So as a result of that, NBFC suffered. They had to sort of realign their borrowing program from short term to medium term. And lack of availability of medium term resources, then strain on lenders, strain on their borrowers, NPAs, delay in payment. So there's a combination of things, a little poor management, everything. But ALM mismatch was the single most reason why they got into trouble.
Just to idiot-proof it for people who are not specialists, ALM, do I presume correctly that it's asset liability mismatch?
Absolutely.
So RBI got strict with NBFCs.
Well, even SEBI for mutual funds and, new guidelines came, single party exposure and AAA investments. A number of things were brought in by these are all improvement measures.
Right.
All improvement measures.
My colleague Ramya Nair, who you might know, she writes about banking, finance. She wants to know what is your experience of repayment patterns during the moratorium? How stressed is the housing loan portfolio, and what is your assessment about recovery?
See, we have disclosed some numbers. I don't want to mention the numbers because I may get it wrong, but we have disclosed the numbers to the exchange as late as yesterday, 31st of July. What were our disbursements and what were our moratorium, what percentage of individual, what percentage of non-individual loans. Now, I have a rough idea, but I don't want to guess it because, I don't want to be inaccurate. But it's available with on the website of ours. And so I don't see this as a big issue, but I think we need to talk about global interest rates to some extent. Today it's interesting you will find it interesting, Shekhar. The total bond market, global bond market, is worth $60 trillion. 60 trillion, all the global bonds. 50% of them, that is $30 trillion, the yield is below 1%.
Oh, I see.
Below 1%. A further 35% of them are below 2%. US in March brought down the interest rates to 0 to 0.25. Japan and Europe are having negative interest rates. I'll tell you a company, again a big multinational European company, CEO was telling me the other day that they borrowed 1 year, 3 year, 5 year money in Europe. For 1 year, the bank paid them. For 3 years, the bank paid them. And for 5 years, they paid the bank. This is the situation globally. And the amount of the yield has come down so much because, why is our stock market booming? One, because people are getting 1% returns. And, in a growing developing economy, emerging market, don't forget 1 out of 6 is an Indian. The market is here. The market is in China. Almost 37% of the global population is in these two countries. Where are the middle class? A McKinsey report, if you have not seen recently, they say that by 2022, the billion people who will get into the middle class, new entrants to middle class, a billion, 90% in Asia and 380 million in India. Look at the power of the 380 million. I'm optimistic because of the middle class, the power of middle income to spend, to borrow and spend, to have a better life, to have aspirations. So I'm very optimistic. And when you said, how will the demand come? Demand will come. Banks will lend. The whole world lends, assets are purchased by loans and paid over a period of time, whether it's refrigerator, television, iPhone, or a mortgage.
So Ramya also wants to know, do you expect further correction in housing prices?
Well, there are 2 points here. In certain cities, there's large amount of unsold inventory.
Right.
Built unsold inventory. Now it is foolish for a developer to sit on unsold inventory for months and months. They probably should announce a Diwali bonanza and sell whatever is built to get some cash flow in. So they will probably have to give some discount or some freebies to potential buyers. New projects, I think, they may not have to do it for new projects because if they start a project now, it will take 3-4 years to build it. But even on the commercial real estate, during this lockdown, I'm aware of deals in commercial real estate, deals that have happened, A-class buildings, where Intel and Google and Morgan Stanley and Maersk and all of them have taken large amount of space. So this working from home is all right to talk about, but in the long run, I don't think it can work in India that much because everyone has small homes. Like I'm sitting in my living room. There are people walking around and all, you can't concentrate the whole day. No one has that extra space in apartments.
I think nobody's going to tolerate you for the whole day for too long at home.
Long also. That's another. Fortunately, our kids have grown and gone, so we are not worried about that.
Deepak, one problem that you obviously understand better than any of us, that is the problem of slums in cities. Now, Mumbai has done a very good job of controlling what was spreading in Dharavi. But why should a city like Mumbai continue to have 70% of its people living in slums? And what is the way out? And will we see a way out in our lifetimes?
It is appalling. It is really appalling to see how people live in slums, particularly when there's heavy rains and monsoon time. And I think we failed in our duty by not addressing this. And I have been in HDFC for 42 years. I remember a committee was set up 40 years ago on how to remove slums in Bombay, and we are still talking about it. So it's really appalling. It's sad what we see. There's a slum redevelopment authority, and but we have to spend much more. See, urban infrastructure per capita, if you see, India only spends $16 per capita on urban infrastructure. $16 per capita. Global benchmark is $100 per capita in urban infrastructure. And China is $116 per capita. We have to spend more in urban infrastructure. And the government, if they can't manage, they have to privatize it. Like, for instance, they privatize the travel. They can privatize the BEST bus services in Maharashtra or in Mumbai. Or, they can privatize the railways and get some money. Anyway, hospitals and all are being privatized. And we see acute shortage of hospitals when something like coronavirus hits us. Private or public, we don't have beds, adequate beds. Because spend on urban infrastructure is so low and we've neglected it. And slums are particularly, we have to redevelop the slums. We have to now, the new government program, I don't know if you saw that, rental housing, which
Right.
the Minister of Housing just announced recently, retrofitting old government homes and using government land to build rental housing. I think it's an excellent scheme if it is worked, because the private sector will build on government land. It's public-private partnership. Only thing is, the flat should be 300 square feet, carpet area. But the incentives for the private sector, no capital gains tax, no income tax, no GST, 50% higher FSI, free of cost. 10% can be used for commercial and you can exploit the commercial space. Affordable housing loan rates. So, there are a number of incentives for rental housing. We have to encourage rental housing, then the slum problems can be sorted to some extent.
So will you get involved in this rental housing project?
Oh, certainly. If a state government has some land and a private developer wants to build it, we can fund the private developer.
And that you think is a good plan?
I think it's a good plan. We have to implement. See, we always have good plan. Our execution, we falter. In execution, we falter.
So look at just Dharavi as an example, because any slum is the same, but Dharavi has become such an symbolic thing. How would you address the Dharavi problem in a way that is equitable for all? Equitable for the city of Mumbai, equitable for, first of all, equitable for the people who are now living in Dharavi, second for the city of Mumbai, and third for the larger common good of the country.
See, the only way these slums can go is you need to first build large amount of temporary homes, transit homes. Then you can take a large piece of land in Dharavi, say 20% of the land. Whoever is staying in that land, move them to temporary shelters, which is a temporary home, a transit home. Break that slums up and build high-rise to the extent possible. Don't forget, Dharavi again comes on the airline. So you can't go like Hong Kong, 50, 30 stories and all. You can probably do 7, 8 stories or something. But you can build on that land. And you can get extra FSI. And that is how you have to do it. But to start any elimination of slum or removal of slum, where do you put those people who are in slums? You need a massive, massive stock of transit housing. the first step, any state government who wants to get rid of slums have to build 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 transit homes. Then only you can start the process. Because they will want to come back to the same area. They don't want to stay 10 kilometers further. They're used to that area. Their work is in that area. Their family, their kids go to school in that area. So you can't push them away. They'll come back there.
Has to be in situ.
In situ.
In situ.
Absolutely.
So you live in Mumbai. Governments have come and gone. Why? How come no government has done such a simple thing?
You ask me. You
Yeah.
tell me.
No, I'm asking you.
Well, we hope the present government does something. We have, the government has appointed a task force, what needs to be done in Maharashtra under the chairmanship of Dr. Kelkar.
Right.
I'm a member of it, and we have done half a dozen reports in the last 2-3 months on how to attract investors, both domestic and foreigners, ease of doing business, what do we do for housing and slums. Like that, we have judicial reforms, education reforms, health reforms. We've done 5-6 papers, and we've submitted to the government, the state government, the chief secretary, the chief minister. We've had dialogues with them also. But you know, this virus and this pandemic has really taken 90% of their time. They're just running up and down and thinking how to contain this, how to manage this. And so all energies are just going to that, because Mumbai is the worst city in India. And we had Maharashtra has the largest number of cases. It's not just Mumbai. So obviously the state government machinery is all tied up in building transit hospitals, ICUs. They've converted large fields into hospitals. They've converted the race course into a big hospital. They've converted a club, National Sports Club, into a hospital, ICU beds with oxygen and ventilators and everything. All this has been done, and so there is no attention is being paid on this. Once this is over or things settle down, I'm sure this government will do, because they took the initiative and formed this committee.
Because Mumbai, I know that you lend all over the country. My first housing loan was also from HDFC. That's where the beginner goes always.
Why not the second house?
Because someone else gave it cheaper. Competition had started by then. But question is that for Mumbai city, because people come and anybody comes into India, anybody entrepreneurial comes into India, it's in Mumbai. Slums of Mumbai, Mumbai's infrastructure, Mumbai's traffic, Mumbai's public transport, until the other day, until a couple of years back, Mumbai did not offer its commuters any air-conditioned comfort. It's only now that you have a metro and a couple of trains that this has started. So why is Mumbai left behind like this, and what can now be done to fix Mumbai, from where to find the resources?
Well, a lot of work has to be done. At least I don't think I'll be able to see it in my lifetime. But whether it's public transport, whether it's public health, whether it is slums, a huge amount of work is to be done in cities. Not only Mumbai, but Mumbai particular is the financial capital. Excuse me. And it has the largest number of, it collects largest taxes and everything, cosmopolitan. And so we need to do a lot of work in urban areas. The point I made, what urban spend is per capita, we are spending minuscule amount on a per capita basis on urban infrastructure. This is about transportation. This is about slums. So we have to spend more, and if government can't spend, we have to privatize. See how our airports have changed overnight. It took 4-5 years. Now even some of the smaller airports like Jaipur and Ahmedabad and Lucknow and others are being privatized. And you will see a sea change of improvement. Improvement in the facilities, in the services, the cleanliness and everything. So similarly, ports have been privatized. A lot of private ports are there in India, and they're doing a remarkable job. So airports, ports, road construction, So we've seen this, but I think we need to do more privatization and give it, because there is lack of fiscal capacity of the government.
Well, I think that there's lack of fiscal capacity. There's also a lack of managerial capacity.
Yeah.
In the government. So Deepak, bringing this to a close, if we have this conversation again in first week of August next year, what kind of India and what kind of overall environment do you imagine? Give me your best case scenario and your worst case scenario.
I have only one case scenario, which I think we will be booming in August next year. We will be booming, because I mentioned about the pent-up demand, and the growth rate which is projected by the IMF and others is we'll have a 6% positive growth rate. And we are getting to become a $3 trillion economy already. And our vision to become a $5 trillion economy in 2025. We have to aim for that. And
I mean, that's not going to happen in 2025, but
it won't happen. It'll take 3-4 years more, because for it to happen, you need 7% GDP growth rate every year. We are not going to have 7% GDP growth rate. So it'll take 3-4 years more. But I think we will become, in this decade, we will become the third largest economy in the world after US and China.
Well, first of all, the wish that you have for next year, the smart thing you do is that everybody has to agree with that, because everybody has to join that wish. So I join that wish too. I do hope, let's both hope, and all of us hope that by August,
keep our fingers crossed.
Keep our fingers crossed. It'll take some doing, but that we are growing and booming by then. Meanwhile, look after yourself, look after the health of your company, but also yourself, your family, etc.
For your third loan, you must come to us. Third up.
But now you and I know each other too well. I don't think you're going to trust me with a loan anymore.
I can't change the rate for one person.
Because you will think you will say I'm jobless. You don't give loans to jobless people.
Self-employed. You are self-employed now.
Self-employed.
You're a bigger risk. You're a bigger risk now than when you were with Indian Express.
Absolutely. So why would you trust me? I think I'm quite very happy. I'm very happy to have your friendship and trust for a conversation like this, Deepak.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.